Thank you. So that's a long chapter, right? I've got something else to read. There's going to be more reading, I'm afraid. But it's great. So, something good about the Anglican Church is that they love to just read. They'll have a whole section just where they read the Bible. That's it. It may not, even if it's about a different sermon, they just read it. And it's an amazing thing. It's great to have time to do that. Anyway, so that started with them walking around the temple, and Jesus said, one of the disciples comes up to Jesus and says, "Look, this is amazing architecture, da-di-da-di-da." And Jesus goes into this prophecy, not one stone will be left on another. And he's going back, prophesying something from Daniel. And so the disciples then say to him a bit later, when they're out of there on the Mount of Olives, overlooking the temple, "Hey, tell us what you meant by that." And so Jesus went through, he kind of said all that. But immediately afterwards, same conversation in the next chapter, obviously there's no chapter in his conversation, he gets up as far as Teresa, and then he goes to the chapter 25, and he goes straight into these parables we're going to look at in a minute. So on one hand, you've got this apocalyptic stuff being talked about, and that's his answer to them of when these things will happen and what the signs are. Then it goes immediately into some parables. And Jesus says these parables because they are part of his answer. They're not just random stories about some other thing. We're going to look at those parables in a moment. But just looking at that little bit we've read there, when he talks about, it's a few things I want to pick out there. On one hand, Jesus is saying, you've got to, like the fig tree, you've got to see when it's budding and the summer's arriving. You've got to be able to interpret the signs of the times. You've got to be able to read the seasons and work out what's going on. On the other hand, he says, nobody knows the time or the hour, not even the angels in heaven. In fact, Jesus there says, not even he knew it. He must know it now because he's in heaven. But at that point, human Jesus, even God in Jesus, they're talking to the disciples, did not know when it was going to occur. And so on one hand he's saying, you've got to be shrewd, you've got to be able to read the seasons and the times. On the other hand, he's saying, you don't know the time or the hour. I find that a bit of a conundrum myself, but that's the conundrum we have. When he talks about the stones being turned, and he's looking backwards to this prophecy of Daniel, that was a prophecy Daniel gave, which had, depending on how you interpret this, many interpreters will say that that bit of the prophecy about the temple being destroyed had happened already in BC 167 under the Greeks. And the Greeks essentially brought in this big statue of Zeus into the holy temple. And so the empire of the time was saying to the Jewish people, "Ha, we're in charge." The devil was saying, "I'm in charge." That happened after Daniel's prophecy in BC 167. Now we come forward, Jesus is saying it's going to happen again. In AD 66 to 70, it happened again. This time, the Romans, they were the empire. They brought in a statue of Caesar so that everyone could worship him in the holy place. Again, doing sacrilege to the holy place of Jesus, of Yahweh. So this had happened now once. It's about to happen again. But then Jesus, you would see in Revelation, the book of Revelation, chapter 13, 1 to 4, it talks about it happening again, but this time on Jesus' return. And so many people are watching and waiting, seeing when the temple will be rebuilt, so that an Antichrist can do the same thing all over again, and we can predict Jesus' return. Nothing wrong in that. It seems like a pretty sensible way of interpreting what Jesus says. But we need to remember, he says you need to be able to read the times and the seasons, but he also says you don't know the time or the hour. Anyway, now he zooms into talking about parables. And so the parables are these. The first parable has already been read by you, and it went like this. Where is it? I will find it, honestly. So it's going back into Matthew 24, and it's about the faithful or unfaithful servant. So it goes like this. I think it's verse 44. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. Who then is the faithful wise servant, whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is staying away such a long time, and then he begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with the drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's a harsh end to that chap. So that chap was not expecting Jesus' return, right? And so he kind of falls into this pretty bad behaviour. Then Jesus goes, in chapter 25, into the parable of the 10 virgins, or the 10 bridesmaids. So in chapter 25, if you flick over, at that time the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps, went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps but did not take any oil with them. The wise ones, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. Obviously the oil was to keep the lamps going, right? Just in case you were unaware. You didn't have batteries. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight the cry rang out, here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him. Then all the virgins woke up, trimmed their lamps, but the foolish ones said to the wise, give us some of your oil, our lamps have gone out. No, they replied, there may not be enough for both of us. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves. But while they were on their way to buy the oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him into the wedding banquet. The door was shut. Later the others also came. Lord, Lord, they said, open the door for us. But he replied, truly I tell you, I do not know you. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. You don't know the day or the hour. He's repeating it. So these people, the virgins, the foolish ones, were not ready. Why? Bit different, opposite to the last ones. The last one kind of got fed up waiting and thought he's not going to arrive. The foolish ones thought he's going to come much quicker, and they ran out of oil because of it. They thought he was coming tomorrow. They thought he was coming in a minute, and so they ran out of oil. But the wise ones were ready. They could cope with the long wait because they had a lot of oil. That's the point. Now Jesus talks about talents. Matthew 25 verse 14 onwards. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to the other 2 bags, to the other 1 bag. Do you all know this story? I won't go through it. So one with 5 bags, he makes 5 more bags of gold. The one with 2, he makes 2 more bags of gold. The one with 1 bag, he buries it in the ground because he feels, well, he's scared. Scared of his master, or ashamed of his master, or angry with his master. For whatever reason, he buries the money. Master comes back, he takes the one with 5, he's made 5 more. The one with 2 has made 2 more. The one with 1 has made nothing. And then he says, give that one to the one that's got 10. And basically, he tells off the guy who hasn't made any. And he punishes him. And he goes off to everlasting damnation. Horribleness. Horrible. So these 3 parables are all linked to Jesus talking about the end times. They're all basically saying, you have to be ready. And he contrasts them. You've got the first one, where they are expecting Jesus to return any moment. And they are so ready for for him in that moment, that they're not ready for the long haul and the marathon it's going to be in the long run. And so they just run out of oil. And then the next one is the opposite. He thinks Jesus is not going to come back. He's getting so fed up waiting. It's the absolute opposite. And she just gives up on the whole thing and basically becomes a drunkard and starts bullying and beating up. In other words, he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. He was put in charge of people, in charge of a household, and he gives up on his duties and lives a life of luxury and whatever. So it's the opposite. But then we get this one of the talents. And it's not really about timing, it's just about, will you actually invest what God has given you? When Jesus comes back, will he find that that investment, that money he gave you, that talent he gave you, will it have been invested? Will there be a return on everything he's given you? It's a real commercial, it sounds very commercial, doesn't it? But it's basically, these people with the gold, they are expected to take that gold, get out into the marketplace, onto Wall Street, and start investing it. They're expected to get out in the marketplace and start buying and selling and actually making a business out of this thing and doubling their money. Simple as that. And there's this other person who's giving the money and he's like, for whatever reason, doesn't invest it. So Jesus is saying, when I come back, in fact in Revelation it says, when he returns, will he find faith on the earth? And he must be thinking similarly to this. When he arrives, it's not necessarily, are people believing in me? It's no. When I find faithfulness, that the people that were supposed to be believing in me and serving me, that I entrusted stuff to, will they have invested with faith? Will they have got on with it, no matter if I was fast, no matter if I was slow? Were they getting on with it? Were they doing something and getting a return? Will they be fruitful? Jesus wants to say, well done, my good and faithful servant. He doesn't want to say, I never knew you, which is what he said to those 10 foolish virgins. You know, in that time, when they had those weddings, they could be, that whole process of meeting, deciding you're going to get married and getting married could be a few years. And then a few steps of the process. The last step could last a year. It's called betrothal. So Mary and Joseph, we know, were betrothed. And so to split up, they would actually have to go for a legal divorce. But they weren't actually married yet. They were just betrothed. And then when they actually have the wedding ceremony, it isn't such a freaky thing that the bridegroom was late arriving and it might happen at night time. Because actually, that's such a long protracted thing. And people have got to travel from all over the place. And so they might actually have bridesmaids who are supposed to be waiting for the bridegroom to arrive and might actually have lambs, because it might be at night time he arrives. And when he arrives, it's like, let's get married now. We're not waiting any longer. But they're not ready. It's like, sorry, we were expecting you like 2 years ago. We've run out of oil. Duh. So a big point here. Jesus goes from apocalyptic discussion about times and dates and events, and now he's just like, it's not about events. It's about, have you got the patience to wait? Are you expecting him too soon and therefore you've run out? Are you going to be faithful with what you've been given? Are you going to actually invest the talents you've been given? So my question is, who might we be in these parables? We could easily be any of these people. We could easily be in any of those camps. We could all start great, but we could all run out of patience quite easily. In fact, Jesus gives a parable later, or earlier in fact, about the soil of people's hearts and the different kinds of soil. And one of the soils is, the seed is planted and grows, but the brambles, the weeds, the stress and cares of this world choke out the seed. That could easily fit in one of these camps, couldn't it? Where you're waiting so long, and actually you're trying to invest your talents, but the stress and the anxiety and the worries of this world, the worry about making your money, the worry about being successful, the worry about whatever it is that this world throws at us, chokes out the very thing we're supposed to have, which is relationship with Jesus, where we're faithfully serving him, producing fruit. So the very thing we're given can also become like a stumbling block to us that causes us to kind of get anxious and get choked out. We can get, so in my lifetime, my parents' lifetime, and I'm sure it's happened in many, many generations, Christians have thought Jesus is going to come back any moment. And so they haven't invested. The only thing they've invested, and the Pentecostal church puts its hands up and says this. The Elim church say this. They say, yeah, the last, 50 years ago, we were all about getting people over the line because we thought Jesus would arrive any moment. But we weren't about investing in our skills or our careers or our children's education. So many people in my parents' generation did not educate themselves. They didn't bother with their career. And now the Christian church are looking across society and realising we need to raise up some leaders because actually we haven't trained ourselves in all these spheres of society where we should be planting seed and bearing fruit. And so the church is realising that, getting soberly minded and realising, oh, we've missed it. We've been the foolish virgin. We expected him to come back much quicker. We need to get some oil again. We could hunker down in a bomb shelter, waiting for the explosion, and the explosion doesn't arrive. And maybe we need to unlock the hatch and get our head out and go, oh, life's going on, it's still happening. And get out there and start living life again. You could easily call these things false prophecy. Really good Christians who were not cult leaders, they were really good Christians, were saying to their congregations, Jesus is going to come back any moment. And 50 years later, they're all going, look at it. We're skint. We can't invest very much because we haven't made any. We've got no influence. We better start investing in our kids. Right, now they start getting their kids educated so they can go and get some influence and start sowing some seeds out there. You could call that false prophecy. They didn't do it with any bad motive. They did it with great motive. Paul says this in 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 to 10. Now, brothers and sisters, about the times and dates, we do not need to write to you, for you know very well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly, as labour pains on a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you, brothers and sisters, are not in darkness, so that this day should surprise you like a thief. So Paul is saying, you know all this stuff, you know all the teachings of Jesus, you don't need to be surprised. It will come like a thief, but it doesn't have to surprise you. It will be a surprise to the world, but it doesn't have to be a surprise to us. But these seem like opposing things, don't they? On one hand, we need to be aware of the times and seasons. On the other hand, we simply don't know. And so somehow we have to be wise enough and shrewd enough to see what's going on around us and be ready. So many things have happened in society that are circular. Similar things happen. At the moment we have in discussion around the world of geopolitics of the rise and fall of empires and sort of America's on its decline. England lost its empire 100-ish years ago, say. Arguably between the two wars. America's now on a decline. Last week there were meetings between the BRICS countries, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Middle East countries added to it now, and South Africa, talking about how I don't know what the outcome is yet, but I'm sure it will go this way. They've basically been discussing for about a year how they can create their own currency to trade petrol, commodities, whatever, outside the dollar. That's like, this discussion is like soft war talk. This is like before a war, there's always soft war around finance, it's normal. So when they do sanctions, it's called soft war. Sanctions have been happening on and off for decades. It's what we do. So this isn't new. But the point, what's new is, it isn't new, but what's new this time round, or no, let me rephrase it. The cycle has come back on itself, we're at that decline, and so stuff will happen that us Christians can look at and go, it's the end of the world. There'll be a great reset. Well, there might be, yeah. The Antichrist might come and we might get all locked into a currency system. Yeah, you might do. But actually, We have to trust God. Jesus said, I want to find faith, not I want to find something that knows every intricate detail of what's going to happen. He just said, I want to find faith. I want to find when I arrive that you're getting on with what you've been called to do, you're sowing your seed and you're bearing fruit. That's it. We don't need to get it right. It doesn't matter if we know the details. What matters is, are we faithful? The faith is in Jesus looking after us and us serving him. The faith is not in understanding what's going to happen next. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. We have to have faith that God will look after us whatever happens. Just like he's looked after generations before us. Just like he looked after the early church when the temple was destroyed. These things aren't new. They just happen slightly differently. But it all goes up and down like this. Every empire goes up and comes down. The same things happen. Currencies collapse. They redo the currency. There's wars. It's all horrible stuff. But it's normal. We don't think it's normal because we're not reading history. But it's all totally normal. Jesus has seen it time and time and time again. And he's cool with it. He can hang in there very patiently, waiting for more and more people to be saved. But he's entrusting us, through his Holy Spirit, to be getting on with the task. So he's not calling us to worry. He's not calling us to know every intricate detail and be able to play it like a game of poker and win. It just doesn't matter. We just have to have faith and trust in him. It talks about birth pangs. I was talking about Ruth, and Ruth was saying, she was reminding me before she gave birth, and the night before she gave birth, we're out in the car. She says, we have to stop and buy some food. And I'm like, no, we don't. We can do it another day. And she says, no, we have to stop and go and do some shopping. Oh, okay. Anyway, next day...
You didn't do it, by the way.
That's horrendous. Anyway, so the point is, her instincts were telling her, I'm about to give birth, and my body needs to go and nest. It needs to get ready. It needs to get food into the nest, ready for the next week, because we ain't going to go shopping. And there are lots of little things like that every time Ruth gave birth. 3 times. 3 times her body would tell her and start getting her ready to give birth. Even in the birthing process, if you follow your instincts and you listen to the good old earthy midwives, and they tell you to listen to your body, the woman's body will put her in the correct positions as she needs to give birth. It's like, if we're able to listen to our instincts, it's a really good thing. But there's a similarity. God has given us his Holy Spirit. And just like listening to our instincts, we learn to listen to the Holy Spirit. We may not understand what's about to happen. We may not understand why we get an inkling to do something. But as we learn and trust to follow the Holy Spirit, he prepares us to be ready for things, even though we don't understand. But instinctively, at this level of us as humans, we can be ready for things simply because we've learned to listen to the Holy Spirit. Just like a mother being ready to give birth. And that's what Jesus expects. He doesn't expect us to be genius. He doesn't expect us to be God. If the angels don't know, we don't. But it doesn't matter. We can see the signs of the times, and we can simply look at the signs and be ready. And that's all God calls us to do. So I guess, bringing this into land, my encouragement to you is, yes, be ready. Yes, look at what's going on around you. Be involved. Listen to what people are saying, but don't be taken in by everything. And don't be taken in by the fear and anxiety that wants to take over. Because people want to make money out of selling stories, and they will use fear and anxiety because it makes a lot of money. And it causes a whole lot of chaos. But we don't need to fear. So my encouragement is, be wise, be shrewd, read the times and the signs, be ready. Jesus may not come back this time round. It might be another few generations, but that's okay. We can still be ready. We can still be found faithful. He might come back in a few years' time, and that's okay. We can be ready.